AOL was a phone line story from beginning to end. Millions of modems dialing up over the same copper wire that carried your telephone calls, walled off into a garden you had to log into every time. The walls came down because the best parts of AOL escaped onto the open internet. And once they had, you could finally just leave.
But that's the software side of the story. Underneath both of them, AOL and the open internet, there's a separate fight over the actual wire, not what runs on the network, what the network runs on. And it started before AOL even collapsed, and it didn't end when AOL did either.
In early 2008, a municipal electric utility in Chattanooga, Tennessee, called EPB, approved a $229 million bond to build a fiber optic network across the city, officially to modernize its power grid. 2 years later, it used that same fiber to launch the fastest residential internet in the country, a full gigabit, when most of America hadn't heard the word outside a spec sheet.
And it worked. Not modestly, spectacularly. A University of Tennessee at Chattanooga study found the network has returned more than 6 times its original cost. 70% of Chattanooga households subscribed. The fiber division alone has generated over $5 billion in cumulative economic benefit for the region. And EPB didn't stop at a gigabit. They've since built out a community-wide 25 gigabit tier. Most Americans, right now, still can't buy a connection a fraction that fast. So why haven't you heard of them? Because almost nobody outside Chattanooga could copy what they did, and it wasn't for lack of trying. Tennessee state law confines a municipal utility to the boundary of its existing electric service territory. EPB is a power company first. The internet business only exists inside the same boundary it already had for electricity. It doesn't matter how profitable the model is or how many other cities want it. Legally, EPB can't expand past its own power lines, and Tennessee isn't the only state that's made sure of that.
That fight didn't start in 2008. It started years earlier, with the two technologies that got Americans off dial-up and onto broadband for the first time. And which one got there first isn't the one most people assume.
Most people assume DSL came first because everyone already had a phone line, and everyone was already getting online through that same phone line with a dial-up modem. DSL, running on that same wire, feels like the obvious next step. That's not what happened.
Cable modem service reached consumers first, and it traces back to one engineer. Rozbeh Yassini founded a company called Land City in 1990 and turned an $18,000 prototype into a $299 consumer modem. Jones Intercable used that technology to launch the earliest cable internet service in October 1995. A year later, Telecommunications Incorporated and Time Warner Cable both launched national commercial service, Time Warner under a brand called Roadrunner. Yassini later helped write the DOCSIS standard himself, the same standard that would define cable internet for the next 2 decades.
And DSL?
DSL traces back further to a Bell Corps engineer named Joseph Lakelighter, who in 1988 solved the problem that had kept it from working at all. Copper wires carrying data in both directions at once created interference, what engineers call crosstalk. Lakelighter's solution was to make download speeds much faster than upload speeds, asymmetric, which is where the A in ADSL comes from. He proved it was mathematically possible. It took another engineer, John Cioffi, to actually build hardware that could do it at scale in the early 1990s. Even with a decade's head start on the idea, GTE didn't bring DSL to market commercially until November 1997, more than a year behind cable.
So cable didn't just arrive first, it stayed ahead.
By February 2002, 71% of American broadband subscribers were on cable modems, 27% were on DSL.
Roadrunner, that's the same Time Warner that merged with AOL.
The same one, and it's one of the quieter ironies in this whole story. AOL spent $165 billion on that merger, partly to get exactly this, a cable network it could move its dial-up customers onto. Time Warner Cable's own executives refused to fold Roadrunner into the AOL brand. AOL's founder, Steve Case, later described the failure as a major disappointment. The two sides didn't even sign a limited partnership until February 2005, 5 years after the merger, and years after it would have mattered.
So cable didn't just arrive first, it stayed ahead. The phone companies had the head start everyone assumes about DSL. The wire was already in every home, and they still lost the broadband race for years. And the one company that actually owned a cable network couldn't get its own merger to cooperate with itself.
Both technologies were squeezing new capability out of wires never built for this. DSL used the copper telephone line already running to your house, a wire designed to carry a single human voice. DSL exploited frequencies on that copper the voice call didn't use, so you could talk and browse at the same time, as long as you had a small filter plugged into every phone jack in the house, a DSL filter, a passive little box that kept the high-frequency data signal out of your telephone and your fax machine. Without it, you'd hear static on every call. The trade-off was distance. The farther your house sat from the phone company switching station, the weaker the signal. Until around 3 miles, it stopped working reliably at all.
Cable took a different wire and hit a different wall.
Cable ran over the same coaxial line that delivered your television, more bandwidth than copper, but built to send signal one direction only, into your house, never back out. Turning it into two-way internet meant retrofitting infrastructure that was never designed for it, and it meant agreeing on a shared technical standard so any cable company's equipment could actually talk to a customer's modem. That standard was called DOCSIS, Data over Cable Service Interface Specification, developed by a cable industry consortium called Cable Labs. DOCSIS 1.0 shipped in March 1997 and carried nearly all cable modem traffic through the early 2000s. It was built for one job, pushing data down to the customer as fast as possible, with almost no attention paid to what came back up.
Why did nobody care about what came back up?
Because almost nothing you did online in the early 2000s required it. Loading a web page meant downloading text and images. Your side of that exchange was a few bytes asking for the page. Reading email meant downloading a message. Sending one meant uploading a few kilobytes of text. Watching video, once that arrived, was pure download. Your computer sent back nothing but a signal to keep playing. Everything people actually did with the internet ran almost entirely one direction, so the network was built to match.
Which is the opposite of how people use the internet now. Video calls, live streaming, backing files up to the cloud, all of it needing real upload speed in both directions at once.
That mismatch is exactly why the standard had to keep changing. DOCSIS 1.1 in April 1999 added the ability to prioritize different kinds of traffic instead of treating everything the same. DOCSIS 2.0 in December 2001 specifically targeted the upload problem, adding capacity for the direction nobody had bothered with the first time around, the direction voice calls and video conferencing would eventually need.
So even after the retrofit, the network still had to be renegotiated in stages, one standard at a time, years apart, to catch up to what people actually wanted to do with it. And even then, you were sharing that bandwidth with everyone else on your segment of the line.
A dedicated wire that got weaker the farther you lived from a building most people didn't know existed, or a shared wire that got slower depending on what your neighbors were streaming. That was the actual choice facing American households in the early 2000s, and it was the only choice. In most markets, exactly two providers, nothing else.
Which is strange because it wasn't for lack of investment. An enormous amount of money was being spent on internet infrastructure in exactly this period. It just wasn't being spent on the last mile.
It was being spent on the opposite end of the network, not the last few feet into a house, but the thousands of miles between continents. The server on the other end of any connection is just as likely to sit in London or Tokyo as it is in Virginia, and that means the data has to cross an ocean. It crosses through cable laid on the ocean floor. Without it, there's no World Wide Web, just a lot of separate national networks that don't talk to each other.
So while American households were stuck squeezing bits through decades-old copper, someone was laying an entirely different kind of cable at the bottom of the ocean.
Between 1997 and 2002, telecom companies laid roughly 600,000 kilometers of new undersea fiber optic cable worldwide, more than doubling the total length of cable on the ocean floor in 5 years. Investment in submarine cables peaked between $22 and $28 billion globally, with 2001 alone accounting for $12 billion of that.
On what?
On demand that never showed up. The dot-com bubble had convinced an entire industry that internet traffic would keep doubling every few months, forever. Companies borrowed billions to build capacity for a future that assumed permanent exponential growth. When the bubble burst in 2001, that demand evaporated, and the fiber sat there unused.
How unused?
A June 2001 investigation found that of the roughly 39 million miles of fiber optic cable buried under American soil, built at a cost of about $90 billion, more than 97% of it sat idle, dark, carrying nothing.
97%.
The company that best represents what that overbuilding cost is Global Crossing. Founded by a bond trader named Gary Winnick, it built a fiber network connecting more than 200 cities in 27 countries, a genuine engineering achievement laid across ocean floors most people will never see. And it was never profitable, not for one full year. In the fourth quarter of 2001 alone, it lost $3.4 billion on revenue of just $793 million.
They spent that much building a network nobody was buying capacity on.
Roughly 3 times the capacity the market could use, funded almost entirely on borrowed money, $12.4 billion in debt. On paper, that debt sat against $22.4 billion in assets, mostly the value of the network itself, booked at what it had cost to build.
So the balance sheet said they were fine.
The balance sheet said a lot of things. Executives had already been caught inflating revenue by $300 million in 2001 alone, trading fiber capacity back and forth with other companies just to book fake sales. And even setting the fraud aside, a fiber network is only worth what someone will actually pay to use it, and demand had collapsed so completely that bandwidth prices were falling by the month. Global Crossing wasn't short on assets, it was short on cash. It owed roughly $600 million a year just in interest, and by the end, revenue had fallen so far it couldn't make the payments.
That's the part a balance sheet doesn't show. You can own billions in cable and still not have the cash to cover what you owe this month.
On January 28, 2002, Global Crossing filed for Chapter 11, the largest bankruptcy by a telecommunications company in American history to that point, and the fourth largest bankruptcy overall, behind only Enron, Texaco, and WorldCom.
And Winnick?
Gary Winnick sold $420 million of his own stock before the collapse. Other executives sold $900 million more between them, some of it after internal reports had already flagged the company's trouble. Global Crossing emerged from bankruptcy in late 2003, once a Hong Kong billionaires investment group and a Singapore state telecom fund paid $750 million for a controlling stake in a network that had cost $15 billion to build.
And Global Crossing wasn't alone in this, was it?
It wasn't. Roughly 70% of the undersea cable capacity laid between 1998 and 2003 went into routes across the Pacific alone. Speculative bets on trans-Pacific data demand that, like Global Crossing's global network, arrived years ahead of any customer willing to pay for it. Global Crossing was the largest casualty. It wasn't the only one.
So the backbone of the internet got built at a staggering scale on staggering debt, chasing demand that turned out to be speculation, and almost none of that capacity or that money ever reached a house in Dallas or Detroit trying to get online faster.
Overbuilt where the money could chase a story, starved where an actual customer was waiting.
So if money wasn't the problem, if companies would bet billions on cables at the bottom of the ocean, why did the wire into an actual American home stay so bad for so long?
For one brief window, there was a plan to fix exactly that, and it got dismantled by the companies it was designed to regulate.
The Telecommunications Act of 1996.
Gore had been the primary legislative force behind its universal service provisions, the principle that every American household should have access to advanced telecommunications regardless of geography or income. Same logic is rural electrification, infrastructure the private market wouldn't build on its own because the returns were too diffuse for anyone but government to fund.
But Gore left the vice presidency in January 2001, and after that, there wasn't another figure pushing that fight the way he had.
The 96 Act required the old Baby Bell phone monopolies to lease their lines to competitors at regulated rates, so new companies could sell DSL without building their own network from scratch. For a few years, it worked. Hundreds of small ISPs leased lines and competed on price and service.
And then the incumbents fought back.
The Baby Bells spent $234 million lobbying Congress during the 2003-2004 cycle alone to weaken the leasing requirements. By 2005, the FCC reclassified DSL as an information service instead of a telecommunications service, a legal distinction that erased the requirement to share lines with competitors. Most of the independent ISPs that had leased those lines were gone within 2 years.
One regulatory reclassification, and the market that had just started to open closed back up.
When cities tried to solve the problem themselves, the same industry blocked that too. Chattanooga is the clearest example, the network we opened this act with. EPB wanted to expand that gigabit service to the communities just outside its boundary. Tennessee law said it couldn't. In 2015, Chattanooga and a similar utility in Wilson, North Carolina, asked the FCC to preempt those state restrictions. The FCC agreed. An appellate court overturned that ruling the following year, and the state law stood. By its peak around 2020, 26 states had passed some version of a law restricting municipal broadband.
nobody refused to build for those people. The law did.
Even the loosest safeguard barely existed. In 2005, the FCC adopted a set of net neutrality principles, the idea that a provider should treat all traffic equally, with no enforcement mechanism behind them. Aspirational, not binding. The same reclassification that stripped the FCC's authority to require line sharing had also stripped its authority to enforce openness on the companies it had just deregulated.
So by the middle of the decade, two companies controlling most of the last mile, 26 states blocking the public alternative, a regulator without the authority to require openness or competition, backbone capacity so overbuilt it had bankrupted the company that built the most of it, and nobody in Washington pushing infrastructure the way Gore had pushed it a decade earlier.
None of this was inevitable. It was a choice, and you can see that clearly by looking at a country that chose differently in the exact same years.
In 2004, a household in Seoul could download a full-length movie in about 4 minutes. A household in Dallas doing the same thing at the same time would wait over an hour. A 7-fold difference in speed on the same planet in the same year.
South Korea made a deliberate, government-directed decision in the late 1990s to treat broadband as essential infrastructure, the way the U.S. once treated the interstate highway system or rural electrification. The government set speed targets, subsidized providers who hit them, and, critically, required network owners to share their infrastructure with competing service providers.
So the wire was still one company's property, but from a customer's perspective, you might have had 3 or 4 companies actually competing for your business over that same wire.
Exactly the model Chattanooga and Wilson tried to build for themselves and were blocked from expanding. By 2004, South Korea consistently topped international broadband rankings. The United States, the country that had invented the network, funded its backbone, and housed nearly every major technology company on Earth, ranked 16th.
Korea and America had the same technology in the same years. The difference was whether the government required the company that owned the wire to share it. Korea said yes. America said the wire was private property and left it to whoever owned it to decide what happened next.
So by the middle of the decade, the open internet, the thing Cerf and Kahn built, the thing Gore funded, the thing that had swallowed AOL's walled garden and freed 30 million users from it, still existed at the protocol level. The architecture was still decentralized. The standards were still open.
But the physical path into American homes was controlled by 2 industries with no incentive to compete, every incentive to consolidate, and, as of 2005, enough lobbying money and enough legal cover to write the rules that governed them.
The conquest this time wasn't a walled garden you logged into. It was the pipe itself. You couldn't see it. You didn't choose it. It was just the physics of copper and coaxial running to your house, owned by someone who had no obligation to make it faster, cheaper, or fairer.
Pulse Deep Dive presents Al Gore Invented the Internet, produced by Singularity Pulse Network. This series is for informational and educational purposes only. Historical accounts are sourced from published research, reporting, and public record. Some timelines are condensed for narrative clarity. Nothing in this series constitutes legal, financial, or technical advice. Views expressed are those of the hosts and do not represent the positions of any organization mentioned.
Origins is a different kind of show. Every Sunday, we investigate the forces that shape the modern world, the geography, the science, the commerce, the decisions made centuries ago that are still playing out today. Find it wherever you listen to this podcast.
I'm Caden. The Pulse Brief is every weekday, 10 minutes. AI, space, crypto, cybersecurity, What matters most today? Find it wherever you listen.